Well, this is one of the moments you've all been waiting for. Every year, the CEO panel, I believe, is one of the highlights of the Galien Forum. And we have another star-studded cavalcade of CEOs here. And I know the audience is very eager to hear from them. I think we are going to have an informal conversation with them. My co-moderator is Pratap Khedkar, and we both are going to be asking questions. But, it's my hope that it'll be a conversation. Maybe even we'll have one CEO asking another a question or following up, just depending on how it goes.
Can we ask prior CEOs as well?
I'm not going to comment on that one. So, we're looking forward to this, and I think we should just jump right in. Pratap, do you want to?
Absolutely. So, thank you, Mike, first of all. Pleasure to be here. I'm CEO of ZS. Our mission is to improve life and how we live it. And I've been enjoying the discussions all during the day, which is very centered on that mission. Let me introduce the rest of the illustrious panel here. Let me start with the left, Julie Kim. Julie is, of course, incoming CEO, starting the middle of next year at Takeda, and currently she runs the US business. And then we have Rob Davis, Chairman and CEO of Merck. Angela Hwang, who is CEO and partner for Flagship Pioneering and a CEO of Metaphore Biotechnologies as well. And we have Jean-Frederic Paulsen with us from Ferring. He's the chairman of Ferring. And with that, let's just get into the questions.
I would just like to say one thing, because Jean-Frederic Paulsen, the CEO of Ferring, has last minute agreed to join us. And so we're very grateful to you, and thank you for doing this. And we do have some specific questions for you later in the discussion.
Great. So I think one of the topics that we would like to talk about, we've talked about how to do innovation all day. But I think as we want more runway and more benefit out of innovation, one of the headwinds we are all facing as an industry is pricing constraints. Right? We need the investment. Innovation is expensive. It gets more expensive, of course, as the problems get harder for healthcare, but pricing is creating constraints around the world. So I would love to start with our panel, and maybe, Rob, I'll have you start on that topic first. How are you thinking about reprioritizing innovation or looking at it differently when it comes to therapy areas, or how you think about launches in view of this constraint on innovation, at least a headwind, if I may say so?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Obviously, at Merck, we're always putting the patient at the center. So we always start with talking about the patient, and then how can we drive innovative science to satisfy an unmet need to deliver for the patient. And that's important because that continues to be first and foremost. So the economic constraints are important, but frankly, the overall arching mission of how we think and how we drive actually has not changed. I will say that the different constraints being put around us, if you think about, and I'd separate potentially what MFN, most favored nations pricing, could be from what the IRA did, and probably one I would focus on the IRA perspective is the pill penalty, which you probably have heard about, and many of you had as well. And this is the fact that for small molecules, you only get 9 years versus for large molecules, you get 13 years before you have to negotiate. A lot of discussion has gone on about this, but as an industry player, I can tell you it concerns me because I am seeing investments in small molecule discovery and development are declining. And the troubling thing about that, if you think about this, and many of you, Dr. Rosenblatt knows this well, 80% of the disease biology happens within the cell, not on the surface or outside the cell. And large molecules still cannot make it into the cell. So by creating this arbitrary system where we put economic advantage on large molecules versus small molecules, you're creating a strange or maybe a little perverse incentive to go away from what could be very important diseases. You think about cancer as an area, neuroscience, obviously to penetrate the blood-brain barrier, that takes small molecules, not large molecules. So that probably, if I would pick the single biggest economic incentive that's been put around us that's driving behavior, which concerns me, it's that. So I would love to see that addressed. But more broadly, to me, the thing we have to be careful of is the strength of the United States is our innovative ecosystem. And we have to be careful if we import foreign pricing structures and price controls into the United States from healthcare systems that operate very differently than the United States, that could have a detrimental impact. And so every time I'm speaking to this, what I try to say is, first, let's talk about where we agree. I agree that we have to find ways to lower out-of-pocket costs for patients. That is something, as an industry, we believe, and as Merck and personally, I believe. I also believe that if you look at foreign countries or countries outside the U.S., they need to pay more of their fair share. They have not paid their fair share fully for the innovations we're driving. So we need to find solutions to that. I believe there's better things we could focus on than MFN alone, because we do have to be careful that we don't disrupt the ecosystem that's really made us the greatest discovery and development engine the world has seen here in the United States.
Thank you. Julie, would love to get your perspective as well.
Sure. I think Rob covered many points quite well. And I think just a few things for the audience to remember. When you look at the split of healthcare costs in the U.S., prescription drugs actually represent a relatively small portion overall. So if you look at U.S. or you look at European countries or Japan, or somewhere between 10 and maybe at the upper end 20% of the total budget is spent on medicines. And then when you look at the U.S., it's over 90% that's generic, actually, not on prescription medicine. So really the hyper-focus on the innovative medicines, to Rob's point, is very counterproductive to finding new medicines and cures even for the diseases that exist today. And that's what we're all here for. All of our companies, in one way, shape, or another, are focused on trying to discover and develop medicines to treat diseases that don't have good options today. And that's the counterproductivity that we have to figure out some way of countering.
Great. Please jump in if any of you want to add as well. But Michael, I think you wanted to talk about regulation.
Yeah, thanks, Pratap. I wanted to ask you about the world of regulation, regulatory affairs. There are a few dynamics going on here. One is that many countries and regions are getting more and more sophisticated as we have all kinds of new therapeutic modalities coming in their regulatory process. There's also a sense that in certain areas, the FDA policy is getting involved in FDA decisions, so it's not kind of entirely science. And so the position of the FDA in its ranking as kind of the gold standard, and then other countries follow, may not be the same over time, given the way that things are going. And I would imagine that would have some impact on your own regulatory strategies, like which country do you go to first, and how do you play this chessboard of the priorities and where are you going based on size of market and where you can go in terms of a regulatory pathway. So in a rather open way, I wanted to ask your thoughts about the impact of a changing global landscape in regulation on your own strategies. And maybe I'll go back to Julie again, let Julie start, and then others chime in.
So I guess I would start by saying, and I think the Commissioner Macquarie is coming next, yes. Right? He's in the next panel. So I think what we're hearing from him is actually encouraging. in terms of the direction that the FDA could potentially move in. I think there's still question in terms of the ability to execute, especially with the challenges that we see today in terms of funding and consistent staffing within the agency. But there is the potential for the FDA to continue to set the gold standard around the world. Now, as you pointed out, many regulatory bodies, including in China, Japan, Europe, et cetera, have all continued to improve their regulatory processes, and speed is important here. One, because of what Rob was mentioning, but two, because patients are waiting. And so we don't want regulatory processes that are unpredictable and take inordinate amounts of time. So as that timescale continues to compress, I think for the FDA, it is about executing on some of the statements that Commissioner McCreary has shared publicly, and leveraging technology and AI to provide more consistency, moving away from some of the traditional historic approaches to drug development. And that's the way that we're thinking inside Takeda as well. And I'm sure if you went down the line, we're all switching our approach to development, not just from the R and the D part, but the regulatory strategy as well.
Rob, do you have any comment in this area?
Well, I would agree that that some of the direction the agency's going, I think, if they can drive some of the simplification they're talking about and acceleration of some of the pathways, there is a lot of potential there, I think, to actually do good. We need to keep focusing on that. I do continue to believe that the U.S. and the FDA, it continues to be the gold standard. That I don't think that's changed. And we still always prioritize the United States from a regulatory perspective. In some ways, depending on what happens with most favored nations, the reality of it is the U.S. is going to become more important, not less important. Because if you're in a situation where you're having to price, thinking globally, knowing what kind of pricing you can get in the United States, if you go to a foreign country and offer that price into that market and they're unwilling to pay, you could be in a situation where you're giving access to a drug, but you're not getting the drug reimbursed, in which case actually the U.S. will become a more important area globally than less. So how this all plays together with the regulatory framework has to be understood. I don't think we're in a world where you're actually going to see people prioritize filings outside the United States faster than inside the United States, based on the dynamics that's happening right now.
I don't know if anyone else on the panel has any comment on this.
No, agree.
Yeah, I guess I understand your comments. I get, personally, I guess I would say and maybe this is zooming in too closely, but I do think that there's, at least in the air, changes in views about mRNA, and there's changes in views about vaccines. And I think that may impact the overall standing or pathways that you would go. And I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that or not, but I think there are areas of change that seem like a real direction.
I would separate what is the regulatory approval pathways within the FDA as a traditional body from policy views around vaccines and other areas. I don't necessarily agree with the administration on all fronts. So I look at this as very different to say, what's the regulatory pathway for an approval of a small molecule or a large molecule? Where can we look to deregulate or simplify? Always ensuring we have quality and safety, but understanding that speed matters, speed including in clinical studies. If you look across what's happening right now, the time it takes to get a clinical study started in the United States relative to pick the place that everyone's focusing on now, China, it's twice as long to start a study and get it up and running here as it is in China. Yeah. They've been very focused on driving speed and quality into their regulatory pathways. They're investing heavily into it. And the belief that they are way behind us is changing very quickly. Right. Our view is they run high quality studies and they're doing them faster. we need to be competitive here, which means we need to run with the same speed in how we do the clinicals, how we do the small molecule development, the large molecule development. Predictability is very important. And so all of those elements are what I'm focusing on. And I think a lot of what Dr. McAree's talked about is moving in that direction. Again, to me, that's the regulatory process of the FDA. I see that as different than some of the policy views.
Right.
In the end, I think we all believe, probably everyone in the room, is that science will hold out. Right? And we need to follow the science.
Right. And in terms of speed, at least in some other countries, surrogate markers may be enough for approval, whereas at least currently in most instances, it's a clinical outcome that's required for approval. Let me move on. I want to turn to where we source innovation. We have in the last decade seen so many new therapeutic modalities, things that have never been on the planet before: cell therapy, gene therapy, microbiome. It's really amazing, mRNA. And and the sources of innovation have widened for us: academia, government research, biotech, and big pharma. And so I would be interested in hearing how each of you think about sourcing innovation. And I think there are a few different models here, but Angela, I might begin with you, because my guess is that some of the people around the table are looking at you as a source of innovation, and then you in turn have to source innovation. So please tell us more about that.
Sure. I think certainly, as we've all said here today, despite the headwinds that we're facing in our industry, there is no shortage of desire for innovation and diseases still to be cured, and many patients, for us to serve. And so in that vein, I see that, very much so in the biotech world. I was in pharma just, 10 months ago, and now switched over to biotech. And I think that the search for innovation is equally as passionate on either sides. It's just here in biotech, we do it in a different way, and we have the, I'm going to say, luxury of a different perspective. In that, because we're a biotech, we are, and especially in this time now, where so much funding has gone out of academia, you find that many of the academics are coming into biotech, and you see a lot of funding coming from private, institutions to fund biotech. And so I do feel, and still continue to sense, a heavy dose of support and aspiration for innovation. But where we're seeing the innovation and how that happens, I think, is shifting a little bit. Just if you take a look at, the last month and the number of deals that have gone on, very spectacular deals and acquisitions that have taken place, a shift towards much later stage products or compounds, which is fantastic. But equally, in order for those to get to late stage, we need to nurture the early science. And so certainly for me, looking at the breadth of the biotech industry, I think it behooves all of us to pay attention to early science as well as late science. And I think that in the early science, again, from the biotech perspective, I see it very differently now. But let's just wind back, say, 10 months ago, and one of my favorite therapeutic areas, vaccines, right? If I was trying to think about what I would need to do for the next vaccine season, I'd be thinking about, what are the best constructs for a COVID vaccine or a flu vaccine. But now that I'm in biotech, what we're able to do is to look at that problem in a different way, which is that rather than think about a particular deliverable I have to meet my commercial goals, what I can think about in biotech is what is the innovation required to ensure, for instance, vaccine resiliency and predictability of the strains, regardless of the kind of vaccine that I'm trying to make. So from a biotech perspective, we have such a great ability to partner with pharma and to be the other pair of eyes on innovation, because we have the ability to look at the problem differently. In this case, if I have a technology that can build vaccine resiliency across a great number of vaccines, everybody wins, not just, my vaccine TA for that season. So I would say that, I continue to really enjoy what I'm doing with pharma companies and the partnerships and the kinds of partnerships that we're talking about, where actually for me, what's most satisfying is the ability to share and to co-create and to problem solve together. And I certainly have had a great number of examples over the last 10 months where we're doing that. And I think that if we can do this together, do it early, we're solving the problems that pharma wants, we're truly co-creating because you have, or pharma has, knowledge in biology that I won't have as a biotech. I have knowledge in molecule design or whatever that technology, and that coming together is a very powerful combination.
That's great. Jean-Frederic, I wanted to ask you about this. You're relatively new in your position as CEO. And I know that you've been focusing the company on how it should source products, new products, for Ferring. And maybe you could just say a little bit about the company and where you are looking for the source of new products.
Sure, Mike, thank you. Yeah, we are 75 years old. So it's quite an age. And we started off with peptides, small molecules, biologics. And in the recent years, we've really shifted the model of sourcing towards more of a search and development model, really having an external sourcing for the innovation in therapeutic areas and in technologies that are not the most common, at least at the time. And I think 10 years ago, I have an example of a gene therapy that we bought from MSD and brought to market a few years ago as the first gene therapy for bladder cancer. At the time, there were some CMC challenges that we took on. And this is a model, I think, that we have looking at externally at opportunities in therapeutic areas and technologies that have challenges, where we can come in with our long-term view and turn them around. And another example is the microbiome, where a few years ago we acquired a company called Biotechnologies and got the first microbiome therapy approval of the FDA 3 years ago. Very similar sort of trajectory of venturing into spaces that are at the tip of the innovation and trying to bring them all the way into commercial.
Yeah, that's great. Rob, you want to comment on sources of innovation?
Yeah, maybe a high-level comment, and then I can speak specifically to Merck or MSD, as we're known outside of the United States.
Sorry.
Well, it's good. It's a global crowd, so I step back and look and say, what makes the U.S. unique and why we lead the world in innovation today? And it's I think people don't appreciate it's not any one part of the ecosystem. I think sometimes there's an overfocus. Well, the NIH discovers and develops drugs, so why do we even need pharmaceutical companies? You just paper them. That's not true. Well, you've got the big pharma. Why do you need public funding for the NIH? Why is the government even bothering? What about universities? Why are they even, the reality of it is we need it all. What is unique about the U.S., it's the only place in the world where we have it, is where you have educational institutions, universities driving great science with investments. You have public funding backing that science. You've got a capital investment environment that rewards small biotech and is willing to invest behind it, that allows for great ideas to come. And then you have large pharma, who has the scale and the capacity to take the early science and drive it through clinical to development. There's a reason why we lead in the world, and it's because of it's that entire ecosystem. And I do worry that we start pulling it apart and challenging each piece of it without understanding the value we have. I'll take an example. Hopefully, I don't know if there's someone here from the UK. Take the UK as an example. The UK has probably the best educational system for science in the world. They have no funding for small biotech. They have really no real biotech infrastructure. They don't value or reward through access and pricing the drugs on the market to UK citizens. And what has happened, a lot of that development, they have great companies. Most of it's all come to the United States. If you go back 30 years, Europe was the center of discovery and development of medicines. It came to the United States. It was because of the economic model we had here and the ecosystem. The one country that is coming closest to now and recreating that ecosystem is China. They are actively building their academic world. They're putting public funding behind it. They have an ecosystem of small biotech, and they're very quickly trying to drive the large pharma model. Today, they're not where we are yet, but they're moving very quickly. And so I worry that we don't lose sight of that and lose sight of the dominance that we need to have. So I think that's important. But to the specifics of what Merck is doing, as we've seen some of the public funding move away, we have reached out to universities. So we are actually doing deals now with universities in ways, in a strange way, they're more willing to deal with us than they probably would have been before. And so we're never going to replace all of the funding, but we are doing that. And then we do look to partner with small biotech across the board in early collaborations as well as late. And so, those are kind of the strategies we're pursuing. I do think it'll evolve, but I'd rather see our system protected than try to change it, because I think we have the best system in the world.
Great. Now, Rob, thank you for bringing up China. Of course, it's come up a few times today, including with Chris. Angela, I know you spent some time there. I don't know if you want to have a commentary on how the ecosystem in China might be evolving and what the U.S. can do when you sort of look at the compare and contrast.
I mean, certainly in the years that I, traveled there and ran our Pfizer business from there, it was the one country where, every other month when I got there, something else had dramatically changed. And I think that it's just a demonstration of the incredible will and the incredible capabilities of that country, is that once they set policy or once they set their mind to something, it just gets done, and it gets done really quickly. But I totally agree with what Rob said, is that what we have here, though, in this country is an entire ecosystem that works really well together. And that sort of, the composite of all of that is very difficult to replicate somewhere else. And so whereas we're seeing, and you're seeing that now, right, a lot of companies in China, and a lot of those assets are being purchased by companies here. There's a big, growth that we're seeing from a technology perspective, from even an innovation perspective in China. What they have today up on us is speed. They work 24/7. And they produce, and they have a productivity level that's unbeatable to what we have. But what I still believe, like Rob, is we have an edge on innovation and the power of an integrated system that is hard to break. So, I think that if you think about it this way, we have the edge, but it's ours to lose. So we can't be complacent, thinking that what we have will always keep. I think that our desire to create great medicines for patients, to leverage the entire ecosystem of partnerships, biotech, universities, academia, whatever it is, to make sure that we're always advancing and that we can be first. That's just sort of we have to sort of have that aspiration and keep that up, because it's easy to lose unless we really mean it. But we have the capability to keep it. And I think working together in partnership and close collaborations is one of the ways that we can stay ahead.
And I think part of the challenge is that at the federal level, there's some friction in this ecosystem. It's not working as smoothly as it was in the past. And so it is fragile, and we can't let that go. So even at the state level, so Takeda's global hub is in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts has a microcosm, some would view it as the biggest microcosm in the US of this ecosystem. And there, we're working with the state to have multi-stakeholder approach to trying to reinforce the ecosystem. So state is at the table, pharma's at the table, biotech, academia. So we're all together trying to figure out what's the best way to reinforce this ecosystem, while at the federal level, it's a little bit fragile at the moment.
Great. No, thank you for your perspectives. Well, we've gone 30 minutes in a session on innovation without saying AI. right? So you got to bring that in. But I want to take a slightly different take. Of course, during the morning, many of you heard the panels talk about AI and drug discovery. But I also want to get into what is concrete proof of where AI is beginning to really work, right? So let's sort of cut through the hype a little bit. And when we talk to folks, we get the sense of, well, we are beyond the point where we say AI, what can AI do? We are beginning to get into where must I use AI? So what are some concrete use cases, 3, 4, 5, 6, big examples where there is bang for the buck, where we know it's not just a trial, it is impact at scale. So I wanted to maybe ask the panel, all of you in fact, to give some insight into where are they seeing it really working at scale, right? Not just as an experiment, not just as a conceptual thing. And of course, we heard about drug discovery, but let me start with you. And you and I were talking about some very interesting examples last night. So we'd love to get your perspective on where some interesting examples have become very concrete for you.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, obviously there's drug discovery, there's what we call operations, where you have sort of the commercial insights and LMR sort of reviews that can be legal, medical, regulatory reviews of commercial sort of materials that can be sped up. But it's really on the tech ops side, on the CMC side, that we also found some very interesting use cases. And it's as much in the yield improvement when it comes to some of our cell and gene therapy manufacturing processes and biologics, where, in terms of the complexity and the number of parameters that need to be taken into account when we look at yield optimization, that's actually been useful, and practically we have used it and seen some actual money returns from the investment. But also, I think when we think of the operations of manufacturing and the QA and the QC, and that sort of speeding up that process of managing deviations and CAPAs, which is a very time and sort of manual effort, if you want, of pretty high caliber and people. And so this can be really sped up and simplified, and in the process save a lot of money. And so we've found that in practice, it's been the most useful use cases near term at this stage.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I mean, historically with small molecules, manufacturing and supply chain was a small part of the cost, and now it's much bigger for things like gene therapy. So it's heartening to see that sort of more immediate impact. Angela, I know you've been using AI in, of course, many of the companies Flagship works with. Would love to hear your experiences about maybe some concrete examples, but also this idea that I think somebody asked a question earlier in the day, how do you get people to change? AI can work wonders, but the people who work with AI don't always come along, and would love to get your sense of what's happening in this ecosystem that you work with, across Flagship.
Well, I think I would have a slightly different answer, a year ago compared to where I am now. I think in established systems where sort of things are already working, and now we have, and we consider the application of AI, it's a change to what we used to do, right? So that comes with risk, change management, all that stuff that you have to do. Flip it the other side, which is here where I am, Metaphore, just as an example, is an AI drug design company, and specifically we make antibodies. Here, we have no established processes, and so from day one, AI is what we use to do our drug design, to do our drug discovery. And so, so it's a very different way of thinking, because it is very much a part and parcel of what we do every day, because we have no other way to do it but this way. And so there's a sense of liberation maybe, and just some sort of freedom, because we don't have any sort of constraints as to how we used to do it, because we didn't do it any other way other than this. But specifically in the application of, you asked for concrete examples, and I'll just give you a concrete example of what we do with AI. Our greatest application in drug design and drug discovery comes in two areas. One is actually how we design the molecule, so using AI to do that. And the second, it's in translational models, right? So how do I make sure that the molecule that I made actually works where I need it to work? So in part one, in the molecule design, we have created proprietary models that will do the creation of turning sequence into structure and designing, protein structures that will lead to de novo antibody design towards, engaging any kind of biology or whatever target of interest that we're looking at. So that's sort of part one of the problem. But part two of the problem is, well, where are we going? What biology do you want to engage? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And there we leverage agentic frameworks. So a number of agents to pull together the composite picture for us that helps us to understand for that particular biology, what is the best way that you can engage it? What is the target of interest that you might want to interact with, and what is that then profile that you're looking for? And it's in the combination of these two things, the ability to have a roadmap of what is that biology problem you're trying to solve, and what might be the best way to solve it, together with the predictive models that we have to create these molecules, that this comes together. And there are a number of really terrific advantages of that, and we do that. This is how we make our molecules all the time. When we design, we don't design in the blind, right? We do a lot of experimentation. We feed those experiments into our large language models, and then we do the predictions. But I'm also using the agentic model to tell me where to go. So when I do an experiment, I don't do it, blindly. I have a roadmap already of sort of the space that I'd like to go to, so that we have a much higher probability of success, because I've already simulated beforehand what potentially the outcomes might be, so that I have a higher probability of success of my experiments. I'm creating differentiated options because I'm studying that space around that target so heavily with our AI, and so I can create lots of options and lots of solutions, giving me multiple answers, not just one, which is great for a competitive advantage. And then it's also efficient, right? Because you're now pointing your experiments to where you might think it works or could work, or where it should work, and also deploying your resources in a focused way. So in that way, we've gained speed, we've gained productivity, but also improved outcomes because we have visibility into where we're going and where to point our molecules.
Great, thank you. Maybe Julie, some examples. We talked about supply chain and manufacturing. We talked about drug discovery. AI, a little closer to the end market, a little closer to our customers. I'm wondering if you have some examples from the commercial aspects which you've been closer to.
Sure, but if I can also give an R&D example.
Oh, please.
Part of my transition, I'm spending time with different parts of the organization, and just a couple of weeks ago, I spent half a day in one of our labs, and they were very excited to show me what they were doing with AI to do exactly what Angela's talking about in terms of speed, more productivity, and better results. So, and this was an example in formulation. So once we already had the molecule and looking at how to best create the right formulation for the properties that we would want down the road, similar type of approach in terms of looking at using AI and the machine learning algorithms to identify what are the best possible options to test in formulation, narrowing that down, and then using a combination of agents and robotics to do the testing 24/7. Because our scientists aren't going to work 24/7 like they do in China. I don't know about all of yours. They won't work 24/7, but robots can work 24/7, and so can agents. And so the combination of the two then does all of the testing, and significant reduction in time. So more speed, less cost, better productivity, and stronger results. And I think similar type of thinking we're applying when you look at the commercial end, and I'm sure at Merck and all of the other companies with in-market products are doing the same thing at the moment. How do you take the massive amounts of data that exist out there and use that to be more precise in how you target, whether it's your healthcare professionals, or how you target your communications and education for patients. So these are things that CPG companies have been doing for a while now. But in pharma, we're just starting to do it because we tend not to be the first adopters of new technology, and we tend to be a bit more conservative because of the regulations and because we're impacting people's lives. So we should be more conservative. But this is something that is allowing us to be much more focused in our targeting and being smarter about how we use our resources and to punch above our weight, so to speak.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to shift the focus and kind of looking at this group here. There are at least 2 CEOs who are brand new, very recently in their jobs, or one who's anointed.
Not yet.
CEO, embryonic CEO. And I'm just interested, I'll start with you, Jean-Frederic. I'm interested in kind of the experience of being a new CEO. You've come from mostly another industry, so it must be like drinking from a fire hose. Plus, what a time to become a CEO, what a time in the industry. So I'd love to hear your learnings or your surprises, or do you wish you had done some preparation? You didn't realize you had to do some preparation that now you see, you wish you had done it. Any comments along the lines of being a relatively new CEO?
Well, I mean, the first thing that to me was really a shock was the timeline it took to go from an idea to something in market. You know, I have worked at Mars and at Coca-Cola, and there it's like 3 to 6 months, and here it's more like 15 years. So that was the first thing that was wow, and it really sort of highlighted the importance and the strategic importance of the decisions you take at any stage, because they have impact over the long term in a way that I think is not the case in any other industry, frankly. So the need for real strategic thinking at its finest, I think, at any step. I think the other thing that really wasn't as obvious and has become increasingly clear now is, particularly in the cell and gene therapy space and new therapeutics, is the importance of manufacturing, and how even though, you know, on the face of things, you may have a drug that works, the side effects are not, you know, too bad, and there's a patient need, there's no alternative, but you may actually not get approved for quality aspects of your organization not being structured in the right way, or processes not being followed in a certain way, even if the product may well be, fine. And I think this really comes back to the importance of regulation, and as really the foundation for our industry and for what allows us to be successful, and really coming back to that and the patient in everything we do.
Yeah, that's great. Julie, I was interested, you told me that there's a special aspect to becoming the CEO in Takeda, and that there's a program for you to prepare you, and I bet people here would be really interested in hearing about that.
Well, it's not a program per se, but unlike many other companies, for Takeda, Christoph, who is our current CEO, will not sit on the board. He will not be the chair of the board once he steps down. So when he steps down, it's bye-bye. So we have a long transition. We actually have an 18-month transition between the two of us. And many from the outside have said, wow, you must be going crazy. But that's not the case. We actually work quite well together. You know, the first part was focusing on finding my replacement to run the U.S. You can imagine how sensitive it is to be recruiting or going through a process for the CEO selection. They didn't know, I didn't know, if I was going to be the one in the end or if they would have gone with another candidate. So we did not look at who would be my replacement if I was the selected individual. So the first part was finding my replacement. The second part has been going on a listening tour. So it's very important for me that I hear from our own team in all different parts of the company, different functions, different geographies, different levels, about what they think our opportunities are, what they think our challenges are, what we need to do differently, what they want to preserve. But not just internally. I'm also taking the time to meet with external stakeholders as well, whether it's our healthcare providers, patient groups, with investors, with government officials, and trying to get a holistic perspective so that the view that I then share next year is informed by all of these different perspectives. So that is a very special part to me that has been a gift given this long transition. And the other piece is also helping to select new board members. So one of the things that I've been told by every single CEO that I've talked to, they've said, you have to manage your board really well. And if you have the opportunity to select new board members, that is a critical activity that the CEO needs to do and do well. And so we have 40% of our board members retiring next June because they're hitting their 10-year term limit. And so this preparation phase is also allowing me to participate in the selection of those board members. So if you can imagine not being able to select the new 40% of the board, that would be quite challenging. So that's the other key part that I appreciate in this transition.
Great. Well, thanks, Julie. And I think it's been a real treat to hear some of the very top leaders in our biopharma industry. And Pratap, I'm going to turn to you for some closing comments.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Michael. First of all, I wanted to thank the panel. I think that was a very nice journey through many different topics. And I think what is clear is, of course, there are headwinds, right? Whether it's pricing, whether it's the rise of China, whether it's other sort of changes that we have to work our way through. But there are also tailwinds. There is technology, there is AI, and I think that the most important tailwind we've had, and I think, Rob, you referred to this, is this ideal for putting the patient at the center. You know, there's a quote attributed to Teddy Roosevelt, of all people. I'm not sure if he said it. He said, the patient does not care how much you know till they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. What a wonderful way to talk about medicine, healthcare. Of course we all care. That's why we show up to work, right? Everyone in this room, all our teams beyond. But I'm not sure the patient knows that, right? And we talked about confidence, faith, belief, the narrative. I think one of the things that my takeaway from the whole day, and of course some of the things that were said on this panel, is this ecosystem is very precious, very fragile. So we have to make sure it survives, it thrives. But at the center of it is that patient. And how can we as an industry, all the stakeholders together, do a much better job? It's going to take a while, do a much better job of actually telling that story so that the patient knows how much we care. It's not enough that we just care. Because I think that will be very, very important for the long-term survival and the room that we need to get for that innovation. So I think with that, I just want to thank the panel once more. And I think we are eagerly awaiting our next.
Terrific. Yes, we are. Thank you all. Thank you.